Welcome to the best of for Beyond the Checkbox. We had an incredible first season and we're very excited to show you our favorite clips from the first year. The first thing that we're going to get into is my talk with Sheldon Kennedy. So enough good things cannot be said about Sheldon Kennedy, a survivor of abuse, an individual who's put forth so much advocacy for those who have been abused, started the Respect Group, which has over 1 million individuals certified in terms of bullying, harassment, and discrimination in the workplace. And Sheldon Kennedy continues to be on the forefront of this discussion. He is an Order of Canada, and he deserves it because he's done such amazing work in this field. What I loved about my discussion with Sheldon is he really brought a genuine authenticity to his journey and how he became a leader in this field and advocating for those who have been abused. And he's advocating for dignity and respect in the workplace. I posed him a couple of questions. One was around how do we change the narrative from let's just talk about mental health to how do we get skills in the hands of individuals. Sheldon had an amazing take, and he said, let's put more responsibility on individuals. We've gone through a movement of taking responsibility away from individuals, putting it on leaders. Sheldon says, let's put skills and tools in the hands of people so that we can give them the skills to help their own mental health. I love Sheldon's take, and I hope you enjoy it too.
And you talk about practice like you would talk about how to practice like a power play or skating well, and the narrative I find right now really frustrating is that it's all about let's just openly talk. And I agree. I don't think people know how to talk or what to even talk about. And the stigma has been reduced in the workplace and in all of our communities around mental health. And now what? Like how do you have those conversations? And I think people are getting stuck there. And the thing I find frustrating, and I don't know if you would agree with this, is the push continues to be on let's just talk more, like more about who knows what or what, like there's no structure, there's no practice around it. And how do you change that? Like how do you try and switch that narrative so it's not just talk? It's like let's talk in a certain way about a certain thing so we can practice and build skill.
Yeah. Well, I absolutely agree. I mean, I don't think we need to be walking around with the mental health banner, waving it from the tops of buildings to have people in our country understand that the majority of our people understand that this is important. I think that what we need is we need a focus. We need a strategy, and we need a focus around these issues, mental health, and what does that look like? And we need to start teaching people, how to have these conversations within an organization. We need to start, teaching leaders, what this might look like, right? And I think that to me, this is culture shift. We have come a long ways. Like what I know about where we were 22 years ago, right? And if I look at, where we are today, we've made significant strides by, leaders such as yourself and Headversity, and I mean the list goes on of people that are doing great work in this space. But what I think we need is that, it's almost like for 22 years we've gone out and gathered up those bingo balls, right? We got all the bingo balls in the machine. Now we need to actually spell the word. We need to spell the plan. And I think we felt good about, talking about this stuff for once. And now I think it's about, structure around it. And we're starting to see legislation somewhat around it. But I think as, people are scared, and it's a myth that if we make this a priority within our organization or within our sport, that we're going to have this flood of disclosures. And we never saw that. Right? We never saw that. We've seen people come forward. We've seen organization have to deal with things. Yes, people have come forward, but it's not this overwhelming flood of disclosures that are going to overwhelm you. I look at the workplace personally, and I think, the workplace, you can't control what people are bringing into the workplace. So if we know the stats and we know the numbers, we know that there's a lot of stuff that's coming into the workplace, that the workplace is the one that needs to deal with it, right? And so as leaders, it's not just having an unhealthy workplace or, doing this in our workplace. It's like, what's coming into our workplace? What is this individual dealing with at home? What is this individual deal? Is it Sheldon Kennedy that's gone through, years of abuse and addiction problems, and they haven't quite got there to a place of, feeling okay, and they're still dealing with it? Like, where does that manifest itself, right? That manifests itself in the workplace.
You put a responsibility on leadership, and is there, I mean, it's a shared responsibility. We hear a handful of studies that have come out and said, if you're going to put money, if you have $1 to spend, you should maybe put it toward leadership or management. I wonder if we're putting too much on leaders, because what I've realized in my work in working with executives and also, our work with adversity is leaders are people. And we kind of put executives on a different echelon of person. Like they're highly intelligent. They have, they're highly paid. They have, high emotional intelligence, and they can handle it. Why? Because, they're leaders. That's what they do. Do you ever think that, is there an argument to be made that we're putting too much on leadership? We're putting it's more shared, and we need to give people who aren't leaders responsibilities too.
Yeah. Well, I think when I talk about leadership, I mean, right now we're dealing with it in their company at HR. So it's not like they're not dealing with it.
Yeah.
It's right. You deal with it, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes the reports get to the CEO and sometimes not, right? But at the end of the day, they are dealing with it anyway. They're dealing with it with policies, procedures, HR. And I think when I talk about a leader, I mean, to me, a leader in a organization and what I view as strong leadership is about clear vision, right? Clear priorities for an organization, and somebody that has his finger on the pulse. And I think when we are looking at, a mission and a vision and the priorities of a company, that's where I think leadership can really make a difference. This doesn't mean that the leader is the one that has to go out and sit in front of, individuals and listen to their stories. But I think when issues become priorities within an organization through leadership, that's when change happens. And that's what I see. And I think being in that leadership role, that's what they can bring. Now, that said, it's going to be up to, other management, and it's going to be up to the individual. I look at getting well from these issues. It's my responsibility, right?
That's interesting. Yeah.
And
yeah.
I have to be accountability for my actions. I have to be accountable to seek help when needed. I have to be, I have to be accountable.
How do you instill that responsibility? How do you teach that responsibility? Because I think that's really important. Yeah. To have that individual be responsible for their own wellness.
Well, and I think, Ryan, like when you go back to leadership, it's about creating that structure of safety and creating trust, so that when we're talking about that, it's accountability. But I mean, think of this: how many times across our country do we tell people, go talk, tell, and they can't get in to see anybody for months, right? Anywhere, not just a doctor. Counselors, for months they can't. So when that happens, we almost go backwards, right? So I think that, and that's just what I've learned. I mean, what I learned is I was at every doctor, every top treatment centers in the world. Like, I was at those places, and what I learned is that the only person that's gonna save me is me. But what can happen is that, when I look at the NHL, Doc Shaw, when I look at, there's some people in my life that really guided me to places and gave me some tools for me to do the work on. And I think when I look at leaderships and I look at companies, we can create that guiding structure so that if somebody does come forward, right? They're going to feel that they've been listened to, they've been heard, and that something's been done. That always doesn't mean that this person is going to get fired, but they just, I think what people want to see is that they were heard and they were listened to. And I think that's about company structure. And I think we need to get to that place, because I think that's the way people are feeling, is that they're not heard.
So that responsibility of creating the structure where people are heard and can be guided towards something, that is a leadership responsibility.
That's a leadership responsibility.
You're also saying that you are responsible for your own wellness.
Well, I don't know who else is going to take care of my wellness.
I think that's
We had an amazing opportunity to sit down with a very prestigious journalist, Emma Day, and what she was able to talk about was what it is like to be Black and depressed, go through the mental health system, and experience all that racism that she had faced. We talked to Emma Day in the real heat, the pinnacle of the Black Lives Matter movement, and that movement is still very much alive and well, and we are so supportive of it. What was amazing about her story is just how she lived these experiences. She talks about cop cars coming to her house and like essentially arresting her, bringing her into a psychiatry ward. This affected me so personally because I am sometimes on the other side of that power equation. As a psychiatrist, we make decisions on people going home or not. That is an unfortunate part of what it is to be a psychiatrist. And she experienced that in a very raw and quite violent way on the other end of decisions that family members and psychiatrists were making for her. This had a deep impact on how I practice as a psychiatrist, on all of our listeners. We got so much feedback on Emma Day, and she's been a real integral part of us getting the message out about what it truly means to be a leader who supports diversity and inclusion. I hope you enjoy that, because this clip from Emma Day had such an impact on us and everyone at the Beyond the Checkbox team. So, I mean, where do we start? There's so much going on in the world. Your message is so important right now. But I guess maybe I want you to tell listeners kind of how you came to this, where you came from, your journey to becoming a writer. How did this all start for you?
Yeah, I was a MFA student at Columbia back in 2013, I believe. And I had to graduate and find a way to do a thesis. So, I was just like, I don't know what to talk about. I don't know what to share. I don't feel like I'm that interesting. I feel like I'm pretty boring. But, one of the things that I remember was like, oh, snap, I did just speed on a Los Angeles highway, wanting to die, like not that long ago. Maybe I should talk about depression and, my experiences. And so that's kind of where it got started, was like, oh, okay, there's a story that's unfolding here that I should probably talk about. Because when I got diagnosed with major depressive disorder back in December 2012, I didn't know a single Black person who had depression. And so starting the Press While Black and sharing my story was a way of finding if there were other people out there that's like me. And I found plenty of them. There's many Black people who deal with depression. So it was just a way of me trying to graduate, but it grew into a huge community. And so I'm so grateful for that.
And what do you think I have some thesis on what has resonated. I mean, of course, your authenticity and the way you've come to this message has really resonated. What do you think has been so resonant with your readers and your followers?
I think I just don't sugarcoat things. I just lay it bare, what really goes on. I think that when you've been hospitalized, there's a whole world behind those locked doors that people don't talk about. And I experienced a lot, when I was first hospitalized. I was physically restrained by nurses. I was threatened with drug injection. I was thrown into an isolation room. I tried to get out. I spoke in front of a state Supreme Court judge. The psychiatrist that I had lied on the witness stand and said that I can't leave the hospital because I will jump out of a moving car if my mom drove me home. I've gone through a lot. And I think talking about what it's like to navigate the mental health system as a Black person is a conversation that we really need to have. And I think that the community that, I'm a part of, I think they appreciate talking about these issues and, shining a light that Black people really need therapeutic support and not criminalization.
Yeah, it's unbelievable to hear your stories around your hospitalization, and you're absolutely right. I've always felt like, we do such a terrible job of communicating what happens, like behind the closed doors of psychiatry, either as inpatients or outpatients. And there's so much that happens in that kind of environment that marginalizes patients, makes them worse at times. And there's also a lot of good things that happen, but nobody knows what the heck goes on there. And then on top of that, you throw in the questions around systemic racism and marginalization of Black patients. And there's so much to talk about there and so much to dig into. I recall reading a blog post of yours around coming to the hospital in a cop car, and how that alone was like a traumatizing thing. And that's not even something that I think most psychiatrists like myself even think about, is like, what's that experience like? Even getting to the damn hospital is a traumatic experience. And now throw in like all the issues around police brutality in the Black community. And like that just adds this extra layer of fear. And patients who are needing to be restrained, that just extra level of fear must be incredibly traumatizing. And I'm wondering if you could walk me through some of your experiences there and what that was like and how you continue to cope with that.
Yeah. So when I, was speeding on that Los Angeles highway, wanting to die, it was a wake-up call for me that I needed to get help. And so the very next day, or a couple of days later, I went to a counseling center at my school, and 2 counselors told me that I needed to quit my program and I needed to, get a cop car and go to the mental hospital. And it was very scary because I lived in South Central LA. And at that time, it felt like I was living in a war zone. The police helicopters came over my house and shook the house and beamed their light in. And it was a really scary time. It wasn't anything unusual to see a cop chasing a suspect through the bushes. And so I was in my most vulnerable state. And I was like, these are the folks I'm going to entrust myself to. I just like, I can't do this. I don't want to go to the hospital in a cop car. I don't feel like I committed any crime. I don't feel like I've done anything wrong.
Yeah.
And so I just fought back and was like, that's not happening. I'm sorry, And so we negotiated down to an outpatient program. And I was like, yeah, cool. I'll do an outpatient program, but it was so expensive. It was like $3,000, and I was a broke grad student and I couldn't afford it. So the only thing that I could afford was like a $12 copay for therapy. And that's what started, me getting into therapy and getting the help that I needed. But yeah, I have done my best to try to avoid the police. The closest encounter that I had to the police when it comes to mental health was I was talking to my therapist when I was living in San Francisco last year. And I just told her that, I'm struggling with suicidal thoughts. I'm really depressed. And then I did that thing that we all do. I took a depression nap, because depression naps, sometimes they can cure a lot of things. So I took a nap and I woke up to the doorbell ringing, and it was 2 police officers at my door doing a wellness check. And it was really terrifying. You go from a nap, just feeling pretty safe, pretty secure, pretty feeling like I'm not physically harmed or threatened. And you go from that to having 2 police officers at your door, and you're having to kind of pull yourself together and present your most mentally stable self in order to get out of that situation alive. And now the police officers, they seem to be nice. They were not threatening or menacing or anything like that. But when you're dealing with an entity that has such a huge power differential,
Yeah.
it can be really scary and really disturbing. And I think you know this as well. You know, the police, they're not mental health workers. The
Yeah.
police are not social workers. We need trained clinicians in these scenarios, because we have mental health problems. We don't have a crime problem. We don't have a violence problem. Many of us don't. Many of us are, you know, they say, the statistic says that folks with mental illness are more likely to be victims of violence than to be perpetrators of violence. You know, so we don't really have things that would require the police to come. So why are they coming? And then there's also the other statistic from the Treatment Advocacy Center that says people with untreated mental illness are 16 times as likely to be killed by the police. So we know that people who with mental illness are actually targeted for police brutality and police killings. And so this is a huge issue, and it's definitely coming to light, you know, right now.
The next clip we want to show you for the best of season 1 Beyond the Checkbox is with Curtis Stange. Now, Curtis, you will see right away, he is a big brain. This individual is a thinker. He's also the CEO of one of the largest banks in our country. They have over 800,000 clients. And what does Curtis enjoy talking about and advocating for? Mental health. Now, you might think that's an interesting mix, to be the CEO of an enormous bank, a financial institution, and talk about mental health. But Curtis puts it in a very simple way. He talks about the stats. He says the impact of mental health is so widespread that he has a responsibility as a CEO of a large financial institution to talk about mental health with his clients, with all of his corporate clients, with all of his partners in this country. Curtis is an amazing individual, and what you will see from him is also a lot of authenticity, and also him bringing himself into his CEO role as one of the largest banks in the country. I really enjoyed our conversation with him. He threw out some statistics I had no idea of, and this is a very impactful interview, and I hope you enjoy it.
You know, I've been in this job now over a year and a half, just coming up on 2 years. And as I started to prepare for coming into this new role as the lead of ATB, actually, you know, we're pretty proud of the culture that we've created at ATB, and we should be. We're one of the best places to work in Canada, and I think naively I felt that meant that we were immune from the challenges of mental illness, and really I found out that we weren't. And you know, now it seems like it was even a shocking question that I was asking myself, but found out that ATB has between 75 and 100 team members miss work every day due to some type of mental illness, whether they're supporting someone or they're impacted themselves from some type of life event or anxiety or other. And so really I used actually this storyline of getting in front of more broadly the mental health of Albertans broadly outside of the 5,700 team members at ATB. And then one thing took off from there, and there was already with Carolee and Tara, two leaders at ATB that have been leading the charge broadly on wellness. They were like, yeah, it's about time, there's a leader here that's really putting their shoulder behind it. And so it was one of these topics that just was so resident and present in the workplace that everybody wanted to talk about. And before long, we found these two paths that we could get involved in. So it was curiosity, but definitely the connection. If there was a connection, it was Carolee Snatenchuk, who leads our wellness program at ATB, that actually introduced me to Laureen McNeil, who's the executive director at CMHA, and everything went from there.
Excellent. And I mean, a guy in your position, you must get asked to be on 5 boards every day.
Yeah.
Right? Like there has to be an ask for you out there all the time, because who wouldn't want you on their board? And this, something jumped out at you, eh? So your curiosity led you somewhere. You saw the issues within your own company, which is an excellent company, and you wanted to push that further. What was the thing that jumped out at you? What was the thing that scared you? What was the trigger for all of that?
Yeah, statistics and stats, you would know them a lot better than I would. But I think, there was the statistic, being a man between 40 and 60, having two sons, two grandsons, the statistics around men, especially between 40 and 60, and the vulnerability and the stigma and the lack of access, combined with these sort of masculine industries that are prominent in the Alberta marketplace, was one. And then the second one was the startling statistics around children. And I was actually at a breakfast that the Mental Health Foundation puts on in Edmonton a few years ago. And there was a study out of the U of A at that time, and they just had freshly wrapped up their study. And I think directionally they talked about interviewing several thousand students between grade 6 and grade 12 in the province of Alberta. And through that study, what they found was that shockingly 4%, or 1 in 25, and I equate that to essentially 1 in every classroom in Alberta between the grades of grade 6 and grade 12, were not thinking about suicide. They were actively planning how they would die by suicide. So I think, whether it was that statistic around children and the stigma around and the pressures around growing up today, or it was around, men in the workplace. And then on top of that, there were some pretty public deaths by suicide a few years ago in Alberta, not just males, but females. And that, just had me awaken to that it doesn't matter there's more higher vulnerability and risk in certain age groups and certain genders, but really it doesn't matter. The statistics impact any socioeconomic, race, religion, gender, industry that you happen to work in. There might be some higher risks, but the stats are overwhelming. And so, for me, finding out and really becoming more well educated around the broad epidemic, if you will, of mental illness in the province of Alberta and across the country and across the globe. I mean, I actually, the more I read, the more statistics that became shocking. Being a banker, you tend to equate a lot of them with finance and numbers, really, and the global impact on the GDP, or the gross domestic product of the globe. The impact of mental illness on the globe is bigger than the entire Canadian economy. The entire Canadian economy is just shy of about $2 billion in nominal, $2 trillion in nominal GDP. And the impact globally from mental illness, cost, loss of productivity, et cetera, is in excess of $2.5 trillion. 880,000 people globally take their life by suicide. This is an epidemic that, as a business leader, I think we have a responsibility to get engaged with and do our part.